Thank you all for coming. I'm Smiles Lewis. I'm the founder of the nonprofit AnomalyArchives. It's the lending library and archive of the 501c3 Scientific Anomaly Institute. And we've been around since about 2003. We've been in this location for 2 years, and we're glad to get started on a new public meeting series that we hope you'll return to if you find this stuff interesting. I'll tell you more about the archives at the end of the event, and if some of you have already seen some of our collections there, but basically we have over 5,000 or 6,000 titles focused on UFOs, parapsychology, consciousness, anything considered paranormal or anomalistic. We don't necessarily espouse any particular belief system about these things. We're open to a lot of different interpretations of the data. But today, with this inaugural monthly second Saturday meetup that we're doing, my good friends, Viktor, Criterion, and Einida, Ecxs, not their real names, for the purposes of today, it's definitely their real names, are some good friends that I've known for a couple of decades now, and they've always got interesting stories to tell about their adventures and exploits, and they recently were telling me about their adventure trying to find out about Adventure magazine, a pulp magazine from the 1910s to 20s and onward that had a cadre of legendary adventurers who went around the world in search of interesting and exotic experiences and people. And in their search for adventure, they decided to help me out with the AnomalyArchives by doing a monthly meetup for kind of relaunching and rekindling this sense of wonder and inquisitiveness that was captured by this early adventure club, but in the milieu of the anomalous. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Einida, Ecxs and the Anomaly Adventure Club meetings.
The way that our talk today is going to fit in with the AnomalyArchives is adventure is basically the search for the unknown. And in Adventure magazine, there were all of these people going out all over the world, having unusual encounters. There were poets and statesmen and animal collectors. Now, today's talk is called Bringing Back Amused, Frank Buck and His Monkey Mountain. On the morning of August 21st, 1935, locals in Massapequa, Long Island woke up to this headline: Capone at large, $50. Now, they were a little confused because Al Capone had been behind bars for about 5 years.
We could be.
Oh, and so they're like, well, how could this be, and why would the reward for Al Capone be so low? Well, it turns out Al Capone was the leader of these monkeys, these rhesus monkeys that had escaped from Frank Buck's Monkey Mountain. And this is going to lead us into a very interesting tale about all kinds of things that took place in the 1910s through the 1950s. Frank Buck was a fellow who was born in Gainesville, Texas in 1884. And he was a 7th grade dropout because he spent all of his time outside collecting animals. He loved birds. He just spent all of his time looking at clouds and completely wasting his scholastic opportunities. Now, he was really good at geography because he always wanted to know where did the birds fly from, because every twice a year the birds go one way and then they come back the other way. And so his personal drive was to figure out where did the birds come from. So Frank Buck drops out of school at 7th grade. He becomes a cowboy with his brother and spends many years, or about 8 years as a cowboy, until one day he gets to go on a cattle herding expedition where they moved a bunch of cattle up to Chicago. Now, this isn't the kind of they're riding horses across the range cow migration. They stuffed them into a train and hauled them up to Chicago. Now, Frank Buck decided that was, he really loved animals, so he's like, that's enough of being a cowboy for me. I'm going to try something else. So he ends up in Chicago at the age of 17, and he goes to a pool hall where they're like, well, if you want to get a job, the best thing to do is to become a bellhop, because you have no education, you have no skills other than being a cowboy in the middle of Chicago, which is very not a useful skill. And so he becomes a bellhop. Well, as he's a bellhop, he starts hanging out at the pool hall, and he runs into some very shady characters who decide they need to show young Frank Buck the dark side of life. And one of them is a cigar cutter named Al Romero, and he comes across an electric battery. Now, in the early 1900s, people thought that getting shocked by an electric battery was a way to cure anything. And so Al Romero is like, 10 cents a shot, we can give people these shocks. We'll make so much money, this is going to be great. And Frank Buck is like, well, okay, if that's, the way you want to do this. And so he quits his job as a bellboy, and they go all over the Midwest, shocking people at fairs and, wherever they can find somebody to give them 10 cents. Now, while they're doing this, Al Romero is teaching Frank Buck the fine art of writing rubber checks and skipping out on boarding houses and the best way to dine and dash. And Frank is a good old Texas boy who was brought up, where his family believed in doing things right, and he went to church every Sunday. So in the back of his mind, he can hear his mother saying, you're on the wrong path, son. So one night, Frank and Al Romero are in the bank of a hardware store, and Al Romero has a thing of explosives and a drill. And Al is like, oh, we're really going to make our money this time. We're going to break into this safe, and then we'll be set. We're going to be on Easy Street. And Frank Buck is like, I think this is the line I can't cross. Once I become a safe cracker, that's a pretty dark path. So Frank says, you know what? I can't do it. Al Romero attacks him with a drill, but Frank knew how to use his fist. So he lays Al out on the pavement, and he says, I'm out. I'm going back home. I've totally, I've blown my chance at finding my path in life. And so he gets on a train and hops his way back to Texas, and he's completely demoralized. So he's in somewhere in East Texas getting ready to hop another train, and he meets an old railroad worker sitting on the side of the tracks who goes, son, you look really like you've just, lost your way. You look really, really sad. What's your story? And so Frank tells him that he tried to make it big in Chicago, but it didn't work out. And the railway man says, I was once in your path, and 65 years ago I had the opportunity to make it big in the world, and instead I decided that I should work here at the railroad yards, and I never left. And every day since then, I've regretted this, that I didn't take those chances. So Frank is like, you're right, because you can always go home. It's especially to his mom who was missing him. And so he's like, you're right. Thank you, railroad man. I will, I'm going to go back to Chicago and try again. So the railroad man gives him a bunch of sandwiches from his lunchbox. Frank hops the train to Chicago, and this time he gets a job at the Virginia Hotel as a bellboy. And now the Virginia Hotel was a very swanky hotel that attracted the theater crowd. And at this time, it's in the early 1900s, so that's the main form of entertainment. So this is like the who's who of the celebrity crowd. They're all staying at this hotel. And Frank is probably about 19 at this time. He's a good-looking lad. He's very, very motivated by this time because he has seen what the dark side his path into being a criminal didn't work out. So he's like, I really want to make it big. And he starts to regret his 7th grade education because all the people at the hotel are all of these incredibly successful people who talk about things like art and literature, and they have table manners, like they know what fork to use, and of course these are all things that Frank had no idea. So he's in a bar one night, and he's like, gosh, I really wish I could become educated, but I missed my chance, what do I do? And he happens to see this old guy in the corner, and so he asks the barman, he says, hey, what's that guy's story? And the barman said, oh, that's old Parson Flanagan. You don't want anything to do with him. He's just an old an ex dropout Irish college professor, but now he's a bum, he's homeless, he's just don't waste your time. Well, of course, to a 19-year-old who's got cash in his pocket, he said, that's the guy I want to talk to. So he goes over to talk to Parson Flanagan. Parson Flanagan says, thank you for buying me a beer, but could you make it a whiskey instead? And Frank says, sure. And so they start talking, and Frank is like, I really want to become an educated man that knows all of this great stuff. Mm-hmm. And Parson Flanagan is like, well, for a bottle of whiskey, I will teach you, everything you need to know about how to be a highfalutin member of the educated society. And so Frank is like, well, I can afford to give this guy a bottle of whiskey. And so every night after work, for the next year and a half, Frank goes over to Parsons' place, and he, they sit there, and Parson makes him read Tennyson and Byron and Shelley, and makes him do elocution lessons, and it's like a really kind of a My Fair Lady situation, but it's a homeless drunk Irish guy teaching the Texan how to also get rid of his accent. So after about a year and a half, Frank is still at the hotel, and he attracts the attention of a theater critic named Amy Leslie. And she's like, I go out to the theater every night, and I always have an extra ticket. Why don't you accompany me? And he said, yeah, that'll be great. That'll fit right in with my whole self-education thing. So he and Amy Leslie keep going to the theater, and after about a year, one day she turns to him and says, Frank, when are you going to ask me to marry you? And Frank is like, well, I'm just a bellhop. I can't possibly, marry a woman of your means, and, you're so... out of my reach, and she says, but I think we were meant to be together. So Frank is like, all right, well, let me go talk to one of my other hotel friends, and I'll get a different job, because otherwise it'll just besmirch your reputation that a bellhop marries a famous theater critic. So he looks up his friend at the hotel named Saul Bloom. Saul Bloom is a fellow who at the time was selling sheet music, because that was the way music was distributed in the early 1900s. Like, you didn't have, this is pre-vinyl records, pre-audio cassettes, and so if you wanted, like all of the vaudeville theaters and such would buy sheet music, and so that was the main source of distribution. So Saul Bloom was doing pretty well for himself, and so Saul Bloom has also become famous later because he serves 14 terms in the New York Senate. He started the UN. He was responsible for the refugee program of getting Jewish people out of Europe during World War II. And so he goes on to have this tremendous philanthropic career. Now, when Frank knows him, he's just a sheet music guy. Now, one of the other interesting things that Saul Bloom becomes known for is he was at a World's Fair in the late 1800s where he discovered the Algerian village, and he fell in love with Algerian culture. And he said, we've got to bring this to America, because this is at the Parisian World's Fair. And so he organizes an Algerian cultural village with acrobats and belly dancers to come to the
Chicago Century of Progress.
Yes, the Chicago Century of Progress World's Fair. And when he's doing a press...
Columbia Exposition.
Oh, sorry, the Columbia Exposition.
Right.
So he's got a group of reporters that have come to see what his show is going to be about right before his show opens, and the musicians don't show up. So he has no music for this event. And there is a piano, so he's like, oh, great, what do I do? And so he just makes up a little ditty that he will become massively famous for. And if you will. So I assume you all recognize that.
The Streets of Cairo.
It's called The Streets of Cairo. It became inexorably linked to belly dancing. Saul Bloom in his autobiography is like he's just lamenting the fact that that is the thing that he will most likely be remembered for in history rather than all of his good works, is that he says that everybody's great-grandfathers will recognize that song instantly for this very, very sordid link to belly dancing and the burlesque. And so he tried to absolve himself from that, but at the end of the day, he said, he who doth protest too much, just loses the day. So that was Saul Bloom, and he's a very interesting character. And but Frank Buck was very lucky to have known him. So Frank gets a different job. This is Frank, obviously on the right. This is Amy. The thing I forgot to mention was when they got married, Frank Buck was 20, and he had to lie about his age because the marrying age was 21. Amy Leslie was 45. She also lied about her age, and she said she was 35. Now, Amy really felt that Frank was going places because he had a very self-improvement style attitude. He wanted to see the world. He was still obsessed with where do the birds come from. And so they had a really good time together. They were married for about 12 years. And Amy Leslie knew everyone in the American entertainment circuit at the time. She knew Barrymore. She knew Lillian Russell. She knew also Sarah Bernhardt. And
that's just a list of the people she name drops in her book.
yeah, those. She also knew many other people, but we couldn't fit them on the page. And so what has happened is she's giving Frank Buck access to these people that as a 7th grade dropout from Texas, he would have never had any other way. So, I mean, he's really gotten sort of a leg up in his desire to become something more than he was. So one night, they went to a lot of parties. I mean, they were constantly at parties. So one night they're at a party, and there is a showgirl who is the toast of the town. Her name is Mabel Barrison, and she had been in the Anna Held production, and she had just knocked her performance out of the park. Anna Held later went on to marry Ziegfeld from the Ziegfeld Follies, and so Mabel Barrison was one of the early versions of the Ziegfeld Follies. Well, this is Mabel Barrison. She's talking to Frank Buck. Frank says, "I can get you out of the chorus line. I can make you a star. I'll write some music for you for the next big Chicago production that is, going to be starting in a couple of weeks." Well, Mabel Barrison says, "All right, I'm going to take you up on that." And so the next day she's like, "Hey, Frank, where's my song?" And Frank is like, normally when I say that, nobody really, follows me up and makes me commit. So then Frank finds out that she can't actually sing. And so she's really just a better dancer, but she's really, really charismatic. So he's like, well, maybe if I write a song where she sings, that this will work out. But since he's working for Saul Bloom, he grabs 2 of the staff writers and musicians. They lock themselves in a room. They come up with a piece of music. And then that night, he and Mabel spend the whole night practicing the songs because the performance is the next day. And the name of the song is Sammy. The name of the production that they're going to try out for is The Wizard of Oz. And it is 1903. Now, the 1903 Wizard of Oz is a very different thing than the Wizard of Oz that we're all familiar with. Like, first of all, there is no song Sammy in that movie. Her character, in the movie, and her character is called Trixie Trifle. And there's other characters. There's a general called General Brisket. And there's a poet called Dash 'em Off Daily. And so there's all kinds of crazy characters in The Wizard of Oz. The most stunning revelation that we discovered when reading about the 1903 Wizard of Oz was there was no Toto. Having a live dog in a theater play was too much work. So how did Frank L. Baum solve that? He decided, he's like, make it a cow named Imogene. And so suddenly you've got Dorothy and Imogene the cow running around Kansas trying to find the Wizard of Oz. And so, anyway, so Mabel Barrison and the song Sammy. The other interesting thing about it was what happened in between the during the intermission, where she would climb up on a ladder and she would sing to a very specific person in the audience. And so suddenly there's this level of audience participation which hadn't been seen in the theater before. And it was such a hit because people really liked to buy tickets for their friends and embarrass the tar out of them by having them in the Sammy seat where suddenly the lights would shine down on them and somebody's singing to them. And so this became just a massive a massive theater hit that traveled all around the United States, and that legacy of the song lived for many, many years, and that was all due to Frank Buck, who became an accidental songwriter. Oh, the other thing about The Wizard of Oz, 1903, is the Scarecrow. It's the most horrifying stage makeup that we've ever seen that will give you nightmares, and so we were pretty stunned by that as well.
Gambling.
Gambling. Okay, so 10 years have gone by. Frank is starting to get restless. He's spending all of his time at parties with chorus girls, and one night he's at a party and a poker game breaks out. Well, the kind of poker game that Frank has stumbled into is a very, very high stakes poker game. At the end of the night, he's won $3,500, which is
$94,000 today.
$94,000. So this is in 1911. Huge amount of money. He's like, I can finally live my dreams. This is great. Come hell or high water, or my wife Amy, I'm going to find where the birds come from. So he gets on a boat to South America the very next day to go and try to buy birds directly from the jungles in Brazil. And he does. I mean, a few weeks later, he gets down there, he spends all his money buying birds, he comes back to New York, he sells them to a zoo for $6,000 profit. So he's like, wait a minute, I just found a way to make money doing the thing that I love most. And the thing that was most important to him, more than the money, was because he loved birds so much, he spent all of his time taking care of them on their journey across the ocean. And this is a very big difference than the other animal traders of that day. Most animal traders didn't care about the animals, but Frank Buck did. And this is what is going to distinguish him later in life and make him such a huge success, is the animals that he brought back to the U.S. were in far better condition, and he was able to make them healthy and survive the trip. In fact, one of the things during his career is he figured out a way to take the animals from the jungle, and he would adapt their diets while in their foreign country so that they could survive when they were in American zoos. And this is, light years ahead in animal care in terms of thinking about the animals. So after... I'm sorry?
Compared to Hagenbach.
Yes, his main competition was a German company called Hagenbach, who had the animal trade firmly in hand until World War I, which is right when Frank Buck starts doing his animal trading. So he knew that with Germany being shut down by World War I, that suddenly he could step in and fulfill all the requests for zoos. So he wants to go to he decides to go to Malaysia and start dealing in all of the exotic animals in Malaysia. And the way he does that is he makes friends with people in Singapore who become his staff, and he sets up a compound, and then he pays people to bring animals, and then he transitions their diets to the American diet and then moves them back to the United States. And he spent about 25 to 30 years all over Asia collecting the most interesting animals, things that the U.S. had never seen before, like rhinoceroses. How do you catch a rhinoceros, bring him back alive, and get him into a zoo? Also, tigers. He had to deal with a lot of tigers. And he has a list of his most dangerous animals, and he always felt that the tiger was number one. And
tiger, black leopard, seldang, which is a water buffalo, the cobra, rogue elephants, Brussels viper, black spitting cobra, rhinoceroses, and crocodiles.
So he's got his whole, because he's had encounters with all of them. But the thing that almost killed him, the thing that he did not see coming, was a 600-pound tapir. Now, a tapir is a grass-eating, very, very docile mammal that weighs up to 600 pounds. So one day he goes into his, his tapir has gotten injured, and he goes in to apply salve, and the tapir goes nuts and knocks him over, stands on his chest, and gets ready to bite his face off. Now, of course, Frank was really not expecting this at all because, he's used to tigers and spitting cobras, but not this incredibly docile animal. So he sees his life flashing before his eyes, and his business partner steps in, puts a piece of wood right in front of the tapir's mouth, and the tapir bites down on that, and then he's fine, and the tapir wanders off. So Frank Buck, after all of these encounters with the world's most dangerous animals, almost died when he was trying to apply salve to a tapir. It was quite an unexpected turn of events. His compound was just outside of Singapore. He spent his unofficial headquarters was the Raffles Hotel, where he rubbed elbows with Maharajas and Sultans and Doris Duke, and any of the celebrities that happened to go through the Asian subcontinent. He was always meeting new and very interesting people. So one day he meets a writer, a World War I correspondent who says, you should really write a book. You're out in the jungle, you're doing these things that nobody's ever done before, and you're doing all of this compassionate work with animals. You should really write a book. And Frank's like, no, I don't have time to write a book. I've got so many other things to do. And
Stock market crash.
so, of course, Frank didn't see 1929, the stock market crashes. He loses all of his investments. He can't afford to bring animals back to the U.S. So suddenly, he is really interested in writing a book. And so he looks up his friend, the World War I correspondent whose name was Floyd Gibbons, and says, hey, you said you wanted to write a book about me. Well, let's do it. And by this time, Floyd has moved on. He's become the #1 radio personality because he can talk really, really fast. And for some reason, that was valued in the early days of radio, is fast talking. So Floyd says, well, I'll send you over to my agent. And the agent says, you've got a great idea for a book. I'm going to give you a co-writer, and let's write it. That leads to Frank Buck writing 8 books in the next 20 years, which leads to 8 movies. The minute he writes a book, suddenly people start to know who he is. Because before, only the heads of zoos and people who were into animal collecting knew who he was. Once he wrote his book called Bring Him Back Alive, suddenly people start taking notice. So,
Shaq and Cooper.
One day he's at the Raffles Hotel, and these 2 young men come in, and they are movie producers. They have just they're coming off the success of a really exciting movie called Grass, which follows Persian herdsmen as they wander around following their livestock to greener fields. Now, this is in the early days of movies, so for the older crowd, that was a very riveting thing to watch. So,
For an Academy Award.
it was actually up for an Academy Award.
The first Academy Award.
For the first Academy Award, which it did. It lost to a movie called Sunrise. Anyway, the 2 producers there, Shodasak and Cooper, they contact Frank Buck because they need advice on how to film elephants in the jungle. And Frank is like, oh, well, this is where you need to find them. This is how you should approach them. This is, you should probably build a blind, and you should do all this kind of stuff so you don't get trampled. And Shodasak and Cooper are like, great. They make a movie. Their movie earns $2 million in 1929 money. So that's like, I don't know, I forgot to do the calculation. 10 million in today's returns. And Frank is like, wait a minute. If those 2 guys can do it, who knew nothing about the jungle, surely I can do it too. Well, Shodasak and Cooper, their next movie after the elephant movie, which was Chang, is King Kong. Now, in King Kong, there is an animal collector who they didn't name Frank Buck, who uses the tagline, bring stuff back alive. And so there's a lot of speculation that Shota Cooper based one of the characters in King Kong on Frank Buck. And so anyway, Frank Buck is like, well, I can make movies if they can. And so he tries to get the attention of Hollywood. Nobody in Hollywood will return his calls. So he finds a company that does short movies. And he said he gets a contract to do 30 short movies. And but as part of the agreement, he says, hey, you guys are giving me the money, the Van Buren Company. Don't look at any of the footage until I come back to the States in 6 months and kind of walk you through it. And they're like, well, that's kind of strange, but okay. So 6 months later, he comes back with the footage, and he hasn't actually shot 30 short films. He's shot an entire film, and it's called Bring 'Em Back Alive. Now, the Van Buren Company says, oh, this is way better than shorts. Let's get this onto the movie circuit. It premieres in Times Square. Massively popular movie. It broke all kinds of records. It makes Frank Buck a household name. It catapults him into stardom. He goes on to make 7 more movies. He starts starring in radio shows. He gets an entire line of branded merchandise. One of which, in July 22nd, 1932, here in Austin, this is the Austin American Statesman, the first, say, 100 members who went to the movie got to join Frank Buck's exclusive adventure club. And so that movie played all over the United States and made him extremely famous and extremely wealthy. And he got a deal with Pepsodent, where if you would send in the box tops of Pepsodent products, you could get access to his Adventurers Club, which obviously was geared towards children. And so Frank Buck is living the life that he has always wanted to live. Here's some more of his promotional things. Now you see my genuine ivory ring. We were quite shocked because he was a massive elephant conservationist. I mean, he hated hunters because he was really into preserving the life of animals. So how did he end up with a genuine ivory ring? Well, it's Ivory Soap branded ring. And so we thought that was kind of those marketers, even back then, they were tricking people. And so, oh yes, and another endorsement was Orange Crush, because this is at the very beginning of the soda, the beginning of soda, and how Orange Crush was, supposed to be this vitalizing orange tonic that would keep you strong and vigorous. And we just really liked the quote was like, oh, the chemicals in other sodas will make you sick, but not Orange Crush. Now, Orange Crush, of course, had nothing to do with orange juice, and in fact, at this time, they were taking orange pulp and adding it to the soda to make people think that it was orange juice. But oh no, those chemicals, if you're in the jungle, they're going to bring you low. So, Frank Buck is famous enough that he gets an invitation to the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. And because he's been spending all this time in his early years with Amy Leslie. Oh yeah, by the way, when he went to Brazil and he came back, they ended up getting divorced. And then he got married 2 more times. But anyway, during his time with Amy Leslie, he learned the art of showmanship. So he gets invited to the World Fair, and he decides that bringing animals, showing them in little cages isn't going to be enough. He has to build the only mountain of monkeys in the world, and I mean, that's a pretty good sales point. So they have 500 monkeys. It's an 80-foot monkey mountain, and for Frank Buck, that's not enough, because apparently he wants people to see these monkeys do more than just scamper around. So he decides a monkey pie eating contest is the way to go. Now, what kind of pie do you feed 500 monkeys? Banana cream pie. Now, of course, I was fascinated by the logistics. How do you come up with, how do you calculate how many pies are going to feed 500 monkeys? Apparently it's 200 pies. Do you slice the pie? No, I guess not, because they're not going to give the monkeys cutlery. So here you see monkeys on Monkey Mountain with their banana cream pies.
Oh.
And the monkeys are like, these aren't bananas. So for whatever reason, there were several people in the audience watching the pie eating contest who had ripe, regular bananas. They start throwing the bananas at Monkey Mountain, creates a riot. The monkeys decide they want the bananas instead of the banana cream pie. They start throwing the banana cream pies everywhere, and all the monkeys start going after the bananas. And so in the newspaper article it says, shortly after this photo, a monkey riot broke out. And of course they didn't have a photo of that, but so we thought that was a pretty interesting way to market monkeys, I guess. Now he did so well in the Chicago World's Fair that he was invited to the New York's World Fair several years later. But he has 500 monkeys, he's got camels, he's got elephants, he's got tigers. Where is he going to keep all of these animals in between the fairs? Well, he decides to set up a compound in Massapequa, Long Island, and it has a slightly smaller Monkey Mountain. It's got a restaurant. It's got elephant and camel rides, and it has Al Capone, Scarface. The reason he was called Scarface, the reason he was called Al Capone is because he had a scar on his face.
Oh.
Now, Scarface, the monkey, was a troublemaker. There's an unconfirmed report that in the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, Al Capone escaped, because apparently monkeys are always escaping. Well, he escapes, gets into a pottery factory, and causes $5,000 worth of damage. Now, the owner of the pottery factory allegedly goes to a judge and says, I'm suing for damages. Frank Buck's monkey, Al Capone, has caused all this damage. And the newspaper report says that the judge tells the pottery factory owner, well, you're going to have to pick out Al Capone in a lineup of monkeys. And so the court case was dropped. Now, we couldn't find the actual court case where this happened, but it was reported in the paper, so I don't know. Anyways, on the afternoon of August 21st, 1935, a caretaker at Monkey Mountain laid a plank across the moat, which he did every day. He went in to do some cleaning or maintenance, and that one fateful day, he forgot to lift the plank up. And when he turned around a few minutes later, there are hundreds of monkeys just running across the plank, and he's like, oh, darn. Oh, heck, now what do we do? So you have an entire community in Long Island that is being terrorized by these 8 to 12 pound monkeys who are running around, and everybody has a great idea on how to catch these monkeys, because what do you do if a monkey is stealing your fruit? It's like, well, you can the official technique was you throw a coat over the monkey, you grab him by the shoulders, and then you carry him back to the zoo, and you can get a reward. So on one of Frank Buck's trading cards, which is one of the products that he later got to develop, this is Frank Buck modeling the exciting story where he subdues a cobra with a coat. He was always throwing coats over things. Now, we talked to a veterinarian specialist and said, would this technique work if you were trying to subdue a rhesus monkey that happens to be terrorizing your fruit trees? And she said, while it's not the most ideal method, if that's the only thing you have on hand, sure, go for it, because you want to block off their vision and then subdue the bitey, scratchy bits. And so you've heard it from a professional that yes, if you ever have to capture a monkey, a coat would be the way to go.
Now, coconuts.
Now, that wasn't the only suggestion on how to trap monkeys. Another one was you take a coconut, put a hole in it, fill it with rice. The monkey will grab the rice, and then they can't get their hand out of the coconut because, they're monkeys. Well, they tried that, and guess what? The monkeys picked up the coconuts and just drank the rice because monkeys are smart. So, and then another suggestion was if you put pans of bourbon underneath the trees that are full of monkeys, the monkeys will all come down and they'll drink it and they'll get drunk and they'll pass out. Now, to me, that sounds like a terrible idea because, 150, the number of monkeys that escaped were about 150 to 175 monkeys. Now, you don't want that many drunk monkeys running around, right? Well, unfortunately, they only found 3 monkeys that had drunk all of the liquor, and they had to take those monkeys to a hospital. So that was not the ideal situation. So Al Capone, they offered $50 for his return because he had this history of being a troublemaker. The other monkeys, originally their reward started at $10, and then $5, and finally it was just season passes to the Frank Buck jungle camp. Well, Al Capone gets caught by a ripe banana. Somebody manages to lure him down. He escapes a few minutes later, and eventually he was caught again. Now, when you have 175 monkeys, almost all of them were caught. There were a few incidents where they managed to stop a train because there were 50 monkeys on the track. They caused a car accident because, once again, they were running across the roads and somebody drove into a tree. But of the 150 monkeys, I think all but 30 came back. Now, for years afterwards, you can imagine that people claimed to see monkeys everywhere. And Frank Buck always insisted that, it was way too cold for monkeys to survive a cold Long Island winter. Now, Monkey Mountain today, well, what happened is World War II came along. That kind of changed the whole animal collecting business. He could no longer go back to Asia because the Japanese had taken over his old compound and they were set up in the Raffles Hotel. So he's making his living as a writer and on the lecture circuit. And he also has to sell Monkey Mountain and his jungle camp because people are rationing gas, and so people can't come to amusement parks anymore. But Frank Buck lives to the age of 66, where he died of lung cancer in 1950. But his Monkey Mountain, which is in this overhead shot, this is his jungle land camp. This is Monkey Mountain. And today, Monkey Mountain is shown right here. It has been turned into a McDonald's, which has no signage of their great, glorious past.
They don't even have a playscape.
Yeah, they don't even have a playscape. They don't even have any monkey-themed things. But there is in Massapequa a historical marker. Now, Frank Buck's legacy is pretty interesting because there is a zoo today in Gainesville, Texas, that is named the Frank Buck Zoo. He helped open it in 1948. Even though he didn't provide the animals for it, he provided his name. At that zoo, they have a little exhibit of Frank Buck's camping stuff, and they are they serve a lot of exotic rescue animals, and so it's kind of a fitting legacy that today his name is being used at a zoo that rehabilitates many rescued exotic animals. Now, we got to go there, and we paid for the private tour, which was really exciting because you got to feed a giraffe. And you got to ask as many questions as you wanted to the docent who was escorting us. And one of the things that they really like saying is the word enrichment. In zoos today, enrichment is all the rage. And what enrichment is, it's games for the animals, their toys, their different types of snacks. And the one type of enrichment that we were really struck by was there's a camel at the Frank Buck Zoo whose favorite form of enrichment is taco seasoning. And so we felt that was a pretty fitting Texas connection. And I think that's it. That was Frank Buck. He spent his life changing the way animals were treated, and he provided many animals for educational purposes. One of the books that he wrote was an elementary school reader. Because he loved animals so much, he tried to share them with the world. And many of the U.S.'s biggest zoos were full of animals because of Frank Buck. So there you go. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, if you have any questions, we may be able to answer them.
What led you to Frank Buck?
Because we've been researching the Adventure magazine, which was started in 1911, he is one of the people that ended up being in a club that many of the members who read Adventure magazine started to have a meeting where like-minded people could get together and they could all share stories of adventure. Now, Adventure magazine became sort of a community that wasn't just a magazine that had fictional stories about adventure. They started a column where people who were going on expeditions could say, "Oh, I'm going to South America and I need 50 strong backs." And then people would send "Hey, take me, take me." And then there was another column where it was called Lost Trails, where it was like, "I haven't seen my friend so-and-so since I left him on the tundra back in 1918. And so it was a way for people to write in and say, "Oh, I saw your friend. He's still alive. He's mad at you, though, for leaving him on the tundra." And anyway, it became this very, very close community that Frank Buck was a part of. And one of the things that the Adventurers Club that sprang out of the magazine did is every year they would have a day for underprivileged boys where they would take them to Frank Buck's jungle camp and let them have all of this access to the animals and the fun and just
Monkey tug of wars.
Monkey tug of wars. Yes,
Between the boys and the monkeys.
Yes, and they did not. We didn't learn who won. We were like, "What? You didn't write down who won that?" That's an important piece of history. And so Frank Buck was one of the many, many names that we've come across that have been sort of lost to history. That it's like, yes. Animal collecting in this day and age is a very touchy subject, and there's areas that we're definitely uncomfortable with, but he was the first person that was like, these animals need to be treated humanely so that we can learn from them. And so also the fact that he is a Texas personality was pretty interesting too, because go up to Gainesville, they've got a zoo right there named after him.
They have his archives after he passed and after his mother passed, his daughter donated most of his personal effects to the museum and to the zoo that are there.
And I'm always fascinated in historical figures that were so hugely popular in that day and age, and then I've never heard, I was like, who? Like, this guy's, he was on par with Charles Lindbergh, Babe Ruth. I mean, people would talk about him in the same sentence, and yet we all know who Charles Lindbergh and Babe Ruth are, and Frank Buck just sort of is lost to us in history. So.
What happened to Adventure magazine, and do you have any copies of it?
Archive.org has several copies of it. It was
it was a monthly magazine. It was monthly.
Yeah.
It was bi-monthly for a
bi-monthly.
while. And it was 200 pages twice a month,
Wow.
filled with adventure
And
stories.
How long did it? When did it?
It went
die?
from 1911, it sort of fizzled out in the 70s. Sometime in the 60s, it became more of a gentleman's
Yeah,
magazine.
I was going to say, I think I remember seeing Adventure magazine to understand.
UT has a complete copy of it. They subscribed to it since 1911, so they have every issue ever. It's in cold storage there.
and I think UT is one of the two libraries in the entire world that has the complete collection. Because it was printed on pulp paper, it was considered to be a pulp magazine, and pulp paper is very, very non-archival, and so most people's collections have just crumbled to dust. But UT does actually have a copy of it. And now, when you're looking at things back in the 1911s, there's a lot of politically incorrect things that you will come across, and so it's one of those things that you just sort of have to read it from the perspective of their time. So don't blame me if you start looking at Adventure magazine and you're like, "Oh, Einida, you told me that." But there are some really interesting stories.
And Frank Buck's biography, the book that we use to do a lot of our research, we're depositing with AnomalyArchives, so you can come here and read it.
Absolutely. Oh, and we have some Orange Crush. If anybody would like some Orange Crush to enjoy the non-chemical orange taste.
turn it back to Miles.
Yeah.
As I mentioned at the beginning, we've been around since 2003. It's a nonprofit lending library and archive. We do encourage people to become members if you want to actually check out some of the books. The vast majority of our 5,000 to 6,000 titles are non-circulating, but you can have access to them here in the archives. We're currently open Thursdays and Saturdays, 2 to 6 p.m. We want to expand those hours, so we're looking for volunteers to help out to expand those hours. But we have I'd say about 1,500 to 2,000 of those books are in the lending collection. Just this past year, we've expanded our collection by several hundred new books. We have a lot of new books that are being published in the fields of UFO research, parapsychology, on all types of arenas, from out-of-body experiences to classic alien abduction, contactee, spiritualist tales. And we're starting this new series of meetups to have a regularly scheduled venue to have lectures. We've gotten to know a lot of different researchers and experiencers across the country and across Texas that we're going to be inviting to give lectures here. So if you want to keep on track with that, you can check out our website, AnomalyArchives.org. We've got a meetup. We've got presence on various social media sites, and we've got on our YouTube channel. We've got access to some of the past lectures that we've held here and at our other locations. If you have any questions about the archives, I know some of y'all got to go and take a look at it a few minutes ago. Anything in particular piques your interest or area of? No, just okay. We also have a free email newsletter, and that goes. I try to get that out every week, but got a day job, so I don't always get to do that as often as I'd like. But we post that through MailChimp, and also repost it to the website, so you can look at it there. And like I say, we've done past lectures featuring people like Nick Redfern talking about the government's UFO files and research into alien abductions. We've recently posted a video for a lecture that we held a few years ago on psychic remote viewing and UFOs. It was presented by the former military remote viewer Paul Smith. He was part of that secret psychic military remote viewing program that ran from the early 70s into the mid 90s. It was in the early 1990s when that was declassified. He's a good friend of ours who's helped the other nonprofit that I'm associated with that also shares the space. It's called INACS, INACS, the Institute for Neuroscience and Consciousness Studies, and it's won an award for its research design for doing an experiment in what we were terming remote dowsing or remote sensing. If you've ever heard of dowsing, this is one of the techniques where it's also called water witching. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but the classic way you've probably seen is somebody with a stick that's shaped like a Y, or two clothes hangers where they're looking for water, underground water. The same technique has been applied in other ways, like what's called pendulum dowsing, where people can use it for maps and so forth to find lost objects. Of course, the military was very interested in this, to use it to try to find landmines or underground tunnels. Obviously, you could imagine ways that the Drug Enforcement Agency would like to use this, and did successfully use this to try to find drugs on ships or underground tunnels, which have actually been in the news recently. But Paul Smith was giving a lecture on the weird connections between the psychic remote viewing community, all these military remote viewers, and the field of UFO, unidentified flying object studies. And so you can watch that lecture online at our YouTube channel. There's so much in the news lately. Ever since December of 2017, there's been a wealth of information coming out about the government's UFO research program. The musician Tom DeLonge, who has made this transition from the pop punk scene to being how you say, a liaison to the secret military industrial complex realm, bringing together all these people with deep connections to the military industrial complex, and is trying to monetize this black world, this black budget, secret budget arena that people have been researching for so long. That it has to do with alleged secret government programs dealing with UFOs and advanced technology that may have connections to the UFO phenomena. And ever since then, there's been a lot of news about the Navy changing its protocols, and of course they've got their reality TV show Unidentified, which may get a second season. We'll see. Meanwhile, there's the Project Blue Book series has been getting a lot of attention. So there's really been this big pushback into the mainstream media realm with these UFO studies and stories, and so I think it's a good time to get people together to talk about these things. We're hoping that in the future with these kind of meetings that you as attendees might bring stories or books that you've been reading to talk about. In the past, when we held these kind of monthly meetings, it was a real community building experience where people would share the types of things that they were coming into contact with in their news feeds. Speaking of the news feeds, through the website you can find a link to the place that we collect all our news links. It's a service called Flipboard, and it's just a place where we can post all the different news that we come across on a daily basis. We also feature all those news links in the weekly email newsletter, so if you don't want to spend time going over there, we republish all the links there. It's really quite a bit of information to keep up with. Can't say that I've read every article. People ask me, "Oh, did you see this?" I'm like, "Yep, saw it. Haven't had a chance to read it yet," but because there's just so much information out there now. But we really hope that you'll join us for these future events here. And it's still a little early here, so if anybody is interested in checking out the archives more, or if you have specific questions, I'm here to answer your questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you, because the people that say they know the answers to some of the most exotic questions, you should probably run screaming from them. So, well, thank you for coming, and I'll be around, and the archives are open, so we hope that you'll join us for this recurring second Saturday event. Next month's will be a yet to be determined presentation, and then the month after that will be another Adventure Club meeting.
Yes, and Victor has the title of our talk
It's
in
called
April.
Wow. The Twisted Tale of Willie Seabrook and His Zombies.
Zombies, all right.
We're going to find the origin of the whole zombie thing, and Workus Faustus, who was a member of the Adventurers Club. That's the theme. And we will take you on a journey that will blow your minds. Yeah. So that'll be in April.
A twisted tale.
Yes, a very twisted tale.
So every second Saturday we'll be doing this meeting from 3 to 5 p.m. And every even-numbered month will be Victor and Einida giving you an interesting Adventure Club story. It's totally true.
Totally true.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.